I'd like to tell you a story today about a wedding that I attended. It was New Year's Day, 1994, and it took place in an old stone church right here in Cape Town. Picture the scene. There was the bride. She had this long white dress, and the bodice was delicately sequined with pearls. And she wore a veil that just so gently covered her face. And just like all brides, she looked stunning. She walked down the aisle, and at the front of the church, she met her groom, Paul. He was dressed in full military uniform, smooth shaven, drop-dead gorgeous, I may add. Well, it was a fairy tale wedding, and they said their adieus to each other, and they proceeded to start a lifelong commitment. He was in the South African Air Force, flying jets, and a year or two later, he moved to South African Airways to fly the mighty Boeing 747. Destinations such as London, New York, Miami, they frequented them. They loved traveling. And in fact, on one of those trips that they had, just before he was leaving, he looked at his watch and he said, "Babe, I'm leaving for New York in 15 minutes. There's a spare seat in the cockpit. Care to join me?" "Of course, is the Pope Catholic?" she said. "I need to pick up my handbag in Fifth Avenue." And so they traveled, one trip after another. They loved traveling. And in fact, it was on one of those trips to New York that they just realized their commitment. It was certain. It was boundless. And in fact, while they were in New York that time, their very first child, guess what, was conceived. Great excitement. Huge excitement, because, in fact, it was the first grandchild on either side of the family. And a couple of weeks later, on their 4th wedding anniversary, they announced the pregnancy to their family, and the grannies started knitting. You can always spot a granny. She's the one, when she hears that word pregnancy, she's beaming from ear to ear. And so life continued. But that excitement was shattered 2 weeks later when Paul tragically died in a light aircraft accident. I was that bride. I was 28, and I was 10 weeks pregnant, and I was grieving. I was destroyed. But then something I realized absolutely terrified me. It was at that point that I realized that I had absolutely no financial independence. I was working in a bank, and my earnings were absolutely pathetic, to say the very least. All right? And I realized I was dealing with 3 things: the loss of the love of my life, the loss of his income, and the realization that we had made absolutely no provision for a tragedy such as this. It's not loss that breaks you, it's powerlessness that breaks you. As I said, I was working in a bank, and I realized that I could not continue with that. and I left that awful job at the bank. But I also realized I had to continue. I proceeded to study. I worked all day. I studied at night time into the early hours of the morning. I could not have done that and achieved my postgraduate qualification without the incredible support of my very best friend, Sheena. Sheena is the one who helped me with Luke. I always say I'm his biological mother, but she, in fact, is definitely his better mother. And 15 years ago, I decided to start looking after my own clients because I decided that no other woman should end up in the same position as I was in. Let's face it, we don't plan for tragedy. But there are so many women, included sitting in here, who are not financially independent. Financial independence is not about having a lot of money. It's about having the freedom of choice, the freedom to stay, the freedom to go, or the freedom, like me, to rebuild. So don't be the woman who needs to be rescued. Be the woman who is prepared. Thank you.